Every Far Cry tested on the RTX 4060 8GB, so we got Far Cry 1, 2, 3, 3 Blood Dragon, 4, 5, 6, New Dawn, and Primal. For Far Cry 1, I'm going to be installing a mod in order to be able to run it with a 64-bit executable, fix the reflections and all that. It's just drag and drop inside the Far Cry folder, so link in the description. So for Far Cry 1, 4K, 4x MSAA, I know overkill, but still, we have so much GPU power that it's not necessary to go lower than this. Highest settings. And we're basically over 200 FPS super easily. We're actually CPU limited, I think. I'm using fast sync from the media control panels, so we don't have any tearing, but yeah. If you don't mind tearing, you're going to have probably 300 FPS. But obviously this was going to be fine. There are some stutters here and there, not sure why those happen. But they seem to happen the first time you see something. Not sure what that's related to. But obviously the frame rate is super high. Looks pretty damn good at 4K with 4x MSAA, no jaggies whatsoever. Yeah, that's weird. Maybe I'm asking too much from an older game. Maybe. But I'm at the highest settings with that mod installed. And as you can probably notice, it's completely fine.
Take care. The mercenaries are trained to work together. If you alert one,
Boom, headshot. Yeah, I wonder if there is any draw distance mod or something. That would be interesting. But obviously in this card, it works completely fine and they shoot you through walls. Far Cry 2, 4K, 4x MSAA, DirectX 10, you can select DX9 as well, but DX10 at least on big city parts actually perform better on the CPU side, believe it or not. So yeah, I think it was a limitation of DX9. The issue with this game is that when you are above 100 FPS, above 60, there's bugs. So even with mods, I couldn't figure out how to fix those. Yeah, those jumping enemies. So my advice is you lock it to 60. If you look down, you get like 200 FPS. But we're not fully utilizing the GPU. So in this area, at least on older CPUs, I was getting huge drops in performance. But on the X9, it drops below 100 in situations like this. So my advice is using Riva Tuner, locking it to 60 like I'm doing right now. This should make the game work properly. There's lots of mods for graphics on Nexus mods, if you're interested. Personally, I think original looks okay, just a draw distance mod would be a good idea. But locking it to 60 I would say is a necessity. But again, if you go unlocked, apart from the bugs, you get a pretty high frame rate, so it's really up to you there. I think it's just worth, again, put it at 60 with Riva Tuner and enjoy. It's older technology, so unfortunately, that's all we got. But the game looks great considering its age. Great art style. But there's so many enemies here. Let's see. Also, I love how the explosions have some parts of leaves moving around. It really looks pretty good considering its age. Yeah, 4K 60 just fine. Go up 60, well, bugs with the physics and the enemies will start jumping around, which is super weird. But there we go. Far Cry 3, 4K, DX11, SSAO I think looks good enough considering the performance. Then video quality, highest settings, obviously. So yeah, the game that basically Ubisoft is using to make every other new game. So if you played this, you probably played any other open world Ubisoft game at this point. I personally think that this is still great considering its age. It holds up very damn well, especially when it comes to graphics. I think they nailed the art style for this one. Although I suggest you have a strong single-threaded performance CPU, because otherwise it's going to drop quite significantly in places with lots of geometry. So yeah. Otherwise, fantastic game, one of my favorites from the franchise. After this one, again, they are basically the same game with some changes. But I think this was peak Far Cry. So yeah, PS3 era game. Clearly, I think they made it with PCs in mind. Oops. Because visually it's way superior. And you can scale it to much higher resolutions, like 4K in this case. Natively supports it. So I think it's a good idea to revisit it if you haven't finished it or something. Obviously textures don't look as good as a newer game, but again, this game is very old at this point. And usually pretty cheap. So yeah, let's jump into the next one. And free that tiger. Let the tiger do its thing. Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. This is a standalone Far Cry 3 DLC, which I think is amazing. It has a lot of interesting references to gaming in general, makes fun of a lot of other games, video game tropes especially. So highest settings, 4K. We're not using MSIA because same as Far Cry 3 to avoid drops below 60. But I mean, there's a button to flip them off. I mean, just look at that. If you haven't ever played this one, it's usually super cheap on sales. And it looks pretty good. I love the aesthetic. And when it comes to performance, it's better than Far Cry 3, at least for me. Oh, well, it has its own aesthetic thing coming here. So again, usually super cheap, Far Cry 3 engine, but the developers actually having fun making the game, doing lots of references. If you've never played it, again, I highly suggest you do. Especially the tutorial is hilarious. So yeah, pretty cool reloads, pretty cool things that you can do to the enemies. So yeah, this one is a lot of fun. I mean, look at the reload for the shotgun. Do I need to say more? Far Cry 4, 4K. On the advanced settings, quality settings, shadows are on high. Really barely a difference, at least in my opinion. Geometry on high because raw distance uses, well, one core. So I think it's worth keeping it like that. And what to say, at 4K, we basically get 50 to 60 FPS. If you're on a card like this, you're probably targeting something like 1440p, I think. So if a game is very close to this 6 FPS thing, you probably want to play at a higher frame rate. You can do 1440p with the same settings, which we're going to do in a moment. So let's them sound the alarm, come on. Thank you. So yeah, 60s at 4K. Pretty good. Now we're trying 1440p, which is a more adequate resolution for this card in my opinion. These are the settings. Again, I just lowered shadows and geometry. And look at the rest of the settings. What can you do with 1440p? Well, quite a lot actually. You probably... Sorry, you probably have a monitor, if you have this card, 1080p or 1440p monitor, well, you'll be easily over 100 FPS. So yeah, nothing to complain about on this one. Just flying in the air. Yeah, works pretty well. I recommend this over 4K any day. 4K seems a bit overkill, in my opinion. But if you want to do super sampling or something like that, it's not a bad idea for the older games. For this one, I'll just do 1440, honestly. Feels more adequate. Cry Primal, 4K, high settings, which is very close to the highest. Let me move for a second. So again, we got very high, but some options go to ultra. And at 4K we're getting 50 to 60, seems more demanding than Far Cry 4 due to the amount of foliage that there is on screen. Again, in this case, I'll do 1440p like in Far Cry 4, which I'm going to switch to in a moment, but the game looks fantastic. I mean, I really like how they did art on this one. Really nailing that aesthetic. So yeah, 4K works at 50 to 60, depends on what's going on. But on high, I think the game looks good enough. Going higher than high is super intensive and I don't think it's worth the performance penalty. So let's do 1440p. What's bad about 1440p? Well, 1440p targeting 120 I think is the best way to use this card, just lowering shadows to high and volumetric fog a little bit. The game still looks pretty damn good. So yeah, works surprisingly well, at least in my opinion. And you get, I mean, there's not as many pixels as 4K, but at some point I think 4K is just overkill. I mean, you get so many extra frames at 1440p that it's hard for me to justify unless it's an older game in the franchise like I did at the beginning, because you can do super sampling on those and you get better image quality. But otherwise, I wouldn't bother with 4K. At least not on games newer than Far Cry 4 and Far Cry Primal. 1440p is just the sweet spot, I would say. Especially, I mean, if you have a 4060, you probably don't have a 4K screen, I think. So this, I think, makes more sense. And it feels very smooth. For Far Cry 5, 1440p right away, because 4K can drop below 60 quite easily in demanding scenarios. Since we have GPU to spare, Ultra is fine, 85 degrees FOV. And well, at 1440p you get basically over 90 FPS. And it feels pretty great to play. No complaints here. So again, in a card like this you probably have a 1080p or 1440p monitor. If you do 1080p it will be basically 144. So yeah, pretty damn good in my opinion. Nothing to envy from 4K here, you get such a smooth frame rate. I think it's kind of a waste to target 4K on this card. You can do it, don't get me wrong. You can use dynamic res targeting 60. But in moments like this where there's more stress on the GPU, well, let's just say it's hard to maintain 60s at 4K. But I'm still impressed on how it does at 1440p especially. I mean, it's completely smooth. I never thought I would play this game at such a high frame rate on a 60 series card when this came out. But this is great. I would just make sure that I have a decent CPU for this one, because it loves using, like in the previous Far Cry's, CPU, especially a couple cores here and there. Uses more cores than the previous Far Cry's, but it's still pretty heavy on the CPU, especially in an area like this. This is the most CPU intensive area I found in the game. For Far Cry New Dawn, it's something similar to Far Cry 5. I mean, they came out basically back to back. So the highest settings, I don't think it's worth lowering anything at this point. 1440p, 90 degrees FOV. And let's get into it right away. 1440p, as you can see, we're getting over 100, some drops into the 90s. Not a huge deal in my opinion. At 4K, like on Far Cry 5, it can drop pretty low. And by pretty low, I mean 50s. So it depends on what you call pretty low. And well, it runs very similar to Far Cry 5. I would say it's a bit more demanding, actually, which is pretty interesting. There seems to be more foliage because of something that happens in the story that I'm not going to spoil. But overall, I mean, yeah, it's basically modified Far Cry 5. Just hit in some way. So does it look good? I think so. But when it comes to CPU and GPU performance, it's very close to what Far Cry 5 offers. So yeah, I recommend 1440p because you get, again, 100 FPS, very easy. So yeah, let's jump into the next one. Not much to say about New Dawn. And finally, Far Cry 6, 1440p as you probably expected. High settings, we got Ultra, but high I think is a good balance of visuals and performance. Going Ultra I don't think is a good enough difference considering the performance hit. Same goes for ray tracing. The performance hit is huge and we don't have even DLSS. So yeah, reflections are nice being ray traced, but again, too much of a performance hit, and we only have FSR1. I would only use this option for 4K. If you're playing at 4K, put it on ultra quality, you should be good to go. But at 1440p, like we're doing right now, and I think it's more adequate for this GPU. I mean, yeah, the difference, night and day. I mean, at 4K you can hit 60s at native res, but it's going to drop below 60. And if we do not sacrifice settings and you don't mind 1440p, which again, most of you guys that own this card probably have a 1080p or 1440p monitor, this is ideal, especially if you have VRR. Usually the VRR ranges are from 48 to 120, so this is right in the middle. So it feels super smooth, looks great. So at least in my opinion, I think this is the best way to do it. And the game still looks great, all things considered. Boinks. So yeah, what to say about the Far Cry franchise on the RTX 4060? Well, it runs completely fine. Most games, because they're older, can run at 4K. Although the latest ones with some upscaling trickery, you can actually get them above 60. In this case, starting from Far Cry 4, I would do 1440p just because of the fact that you can get basically 100 FPS. At 4K it's more like into the 50s, 50 to 60, depending on what's going on. So yeah, great experience so far on this card. Let me know, guys, which one would you recommend of the Far Cry franchise. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Far Cry 3, but I've been playing Far Cry 2 on the Steam Deck. So let me know which one you're playing, if you're going to install them. There is quite a lot of them in the franchise. But I think the most interesting was Far Cry 2. Far Cry 3 is my favorite, but that's because that's the one that I played the most, basically. So yeah, let me know in the comments, like, subscribe if you like the video. If you didn't like the video, like it and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. And we go out with a boom. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate that. See you next time.